Christopher Nolan's Tenet was the last 2020 release I watched in 2020, and if you've seen my best and worst of the year, you know I had many thoughts about it. There's a lot about this that I immensely enjoy, and yet there's also just as much, if not more, about this that pisses me off. I've seen it 3 times now, and each time it's been this weird dynamic where I was giving myself a treat while also actively choosing violence against myself every time I pressed play. So I thought, since I've seen this enigma of a film too many times and my head hurts now, might as well get content out of it. A word of warning before we go into this is going to be less of a structured video essay with an actual point, and more of a messy discussion about what I thought the movie did really well and really badly. I just need to talk about this film. I will be covering some spoilers, so you have been warned. Alright, let's get into it. Tenet's concept is, without a doubt, really cool. Nolan is known for playing with time, and Tenet falls into this catalog of mind-bending, time-bending stories. I loved how we got a taste early on at the opening opera sequence, when the protagonist is almost hit with an inverted bullet. The opera sequence on its own wouldn't have been anything super special, but it's the inclusion of the inverted bullet and this mysterious someone saving the protagonist's life that gets our gears going and our heads thudding. Speaking of the mysterious someone, I only realized after a second viewing that this is actually Neil. Because of how absolutely packed and, let's be honest, convoluted this story is, I completely forgot about him when watching it for the first time. All the more reason why I think you get more out of a rewatch with this than you would on an initial viewing. It's great to have us dive right into what's going to make this story special. From a writing standpoint, if your story has an interesting concept, you kinda want to get to it as soon as possible, and this movie sticks by that. Barely 10 minutes in, and we've already seen a bullet moving backwards through time. Interest has been piqued. As we progress through the story, the concept only builds on itself, getting cooler and cooler. We start off with inverted bullets, then learn, oh crap, people can be inverted too, and then whoa, temporal pincer movement, and then look at that, we can go backwards and forwards in time, and all of that culminates in the final set piece where we combine everything together to make one big sexy time-bending climax. What I enjoy about Nolan too is that he never just does a concept as it is. Time travel is a concept that's existed for quite a while now, but never really how it's seen in Tenet. When we think of time travel, we usually think of someone going back in time in order to change past events. There are tried and true cliches of the trope. Don't let anyone see you, don't come into contact with your past self, and while Tenet does use some of these cliches, the entire time travel idea in the movie is much more full. Tenet's time travel takes the classic framework and then twists and manipulates it to become more. It's not just restricted to being able to go backwards and forwards in time. That is only the baseline. Tenet treats its time not as a straight line as something like Back to the Future did, nor even as many straight lines as something like Avengers Endgame did. Instead, time in Tenet is more like it is in Arrival, a circle, and even then they differ. In Arrival, time is circular, yes, but everything still flows forward. We can see things that happen in our future to understand our past and present, but we cannot physically go there before a time is right. In Tenet, point A moves to point B, but at the same time in the future, point B can flow backward to point A. Now, point A and point B can be separated by an hour, as it is in the final battle, or it can be separated by a number of days, as it is when the protagonist and Neil fight the antagonist, which is really just the inverted protagonist, or it can be separated by months, as it is when Kat goes back to the yacht in Vietnam to stop Sator killing himself before they get the algorithm. If you haven't seen Tenet, I deeply apologize for the mental atrocities committed by that last paragraph. What I'm saying is that Nolan took a concept already as fun and complex as time travel and amped it up to 110. Seriously, it's pretty commendable, and I just cannot believe that one person can think up something as innovative as this. Tenet is worth watching just for the action alone, and that is a stance I will continue to take. I'm not even getting to the inverted action yet, but trust me, we will talk about it. But even the quote-unquote normal action scenes are insane because there's so much more than quote-unquote normal action scenes. I already talked about the opening opera sequence. It's nothing super crazy, but it's still pretty fun to watch. But things get amazing with some of the later sequences, like bungee jumping into a high-rise, carrying out a high-speed highway heist, and crashing a real plane into a building. Like, my goodness, this was all real. Nolan really said, I have $200 million to make this movie and I'm gonna use every dollar. Although apparently they crashed a real plane because it costs less than CGI, which is insane to me, but also Nolan loves his practical effects, so I'm pretty sure this was just super fun. But that's only the normal action in this. Tenet's most exciting action comes from the inverted sequences. I can't even fully explain the reaction I had when seeing the very first inverted sequence for the first time. It is truly an experience and something crazy to wrap your head around. The protagonist is moving forward in time while the antagonist is moving backwards backward in time, and both are happening simultaneously. What? Like, I would love to see how this was shot because it's insane. I can't make sense of it. Later on, we get to see the whole thing reversed from the antagonist's perspective, who, once again, is the inverted protagonist. It's honestly eye candy. But it gets better with the chase sequence, which is made even more amazing, seeing as it comes right after the high-speed highway heist, so you don't even get a chance to breathe during the entire thing. And again, we not only get to see this scene forward, but also backward when the protagonist inverts himself and we realize he was actually the car in the middle. It's incredible. And of course, the temporal pincer movement at the end with one team moving forward and the other moving backward. It looks stellar. The visual effects team really brought it for this movie. While we're talking about temporal pincer movements, the first time we see one right after the high-speed highway heist, I was both speechless in awe and utterly confused. Like, I knew what I was watching was something to behold, but at the same time, I had no idea what the hell was going on, and I was not having a fun time. I loved it. Good action is not easy to do. In fact, I don't think anything in film is easy to do, but action has definitely got to be one of the hardest. With as many action films as there are saturating the market, with as many different variations of people fighting as there are out there, to be able to make action in a movie both new and inventive, while also being visually impressive, is really commendable, and Tenet manages it with each sequence. Everything from the inception, of the ideas, to the writing, to the shooting, to the editing, it's crazy to think about and to see, and the trouble they went to definitely paid off. The action in the movie is a drawing factor. Maybe its strongest one, 'cause we only go downhill from here. This entire movie is exposition. Nolan films always have a lot of exposition, but I don't think I've ever seen it handled as poorly as with Tenet. I don't think exposition is bad in and of itself. It's a necessary evil, seeing as you have to let your audience know somehow what's going on in the story. But it can be done well, or it can be done the way it is in Tenet. The first 30 minutes or so of this movie is pure exposition, and I'm not even exaggerating. We go from the opera scene to the protagonist being tortured and taking a suicide pill, only to learn it was fake and used as a test. Here, nondescript white guy tells him about a mission and Tenet. After that, nondescript white woman tells him about inverted weapons and how they could cause World War III. Then, nondescript white guy tells him about how it's impossible to get to Sanjay Singh, and then nondescript Indian woman tells him about something I literally don't remember. Arms dealing and Seder. Cool. After that, he goes to nondescript white guy who tells him about Seder and his wife, and then nondescript white woman tells him about her husband Seder, and holy crap, we're already half an hour into this movie and it's just been exposition the whole time. And as we progress through the movie, we just get more and more exposition.
All I have for you is a gesture in combination with a word.
One of these bullets is like us, traveling forwards through time.
Time isn't the problem. It's getting out alive is the problem.
Moved to London, said they'll be on the outs with Moscow.
In the 70s, you had a population of about 200,000.
He threatened me with police.
A storage facility for art that was acquired.
But not yet taxed.
So it's sort of like a transit lounge for art.
The facility is flooded with halide gas.
You want to crash a plane?
But not from the air. Not so dramatic. Norsk Crete. They use the hangar on the west side of the Freeport.
Theaters built a turnstile in that vault. Theater tried to lift the only loose 241 from under a CIA team at the Opera Station Key.
A remote Russian missile station was overwhelmed and held for a week.
Digging plutonium from the rubble of my city.
Can you stabilize the inverse radiation by inverting the patient?
You run, the wind will be at your back.
Because the environment century flows in our direction.
It's bringing us to the grandfather paradox.
The scientist who built it took her own life so she couldn't be forced to make another.
Inoperable pancreatic cancer. Ricky's seen it on my face just for an instant. I considered it.
Inverse, conventional, forward antagonist, inverted antagonist, they have it all.
I realized I wasn't working for you. We've both been working for me.
You want to see Tenet? There you go. You just saw it. I do think it's not as egregious in the latter half of the movie as it is in the former, because it feels a bit more spaced out, and I got more used to the concept and the characters. But it's still pretty bad, so much so that the film feels like exposition with some fun action scenes thrown in between. And spoiler alert, a movie should never feel like that. A story, period, should never feel like that. Because the concept is so big, the exposition ends up being really big, and being fed as much information as we are in as sheer a volume as this makes for a tough viewing experience. It probably took me over an hour to watch just the first 30 minutes of the film, with the amount of pausing and rewinding I had to do. But don't worry, insult was added to injury because of... I couldn't hear anything throughout the whole thing. I mentioned this in my best and worst of 2020, but watching this movie was so strange because I genuinely couldn't hear what anyone was saying. To me, the movie was not only convoluted because of all the high-level exposition, but also because the dialogue was too quiet in most scenes, while the score and sound effects were deafening. I thought it must be me and my dumb brain, but many other people also had the same experience, which means the sound mixing on this was not good, to say the least. I was having a hard enough time trying to control the sound so I could hear what was happening while also not deafening myself with the score over top the dialogue. I can't even imagine what it was like in theaters. And it's frustrating. Like with the exposition, having to pause and rewind upwards of 10 times over the same 5-second piece of dialogue just to hear what was being said is not what I signed up for. In fact, I think I would prefer it if I was rewinding multiple times just to understand the exposition, because at least then that's actually part of the story and I'm still gaining something from it. Rewinding because I can't hear? That's just annoying, and honestly kind of unacceptable from a blockbuster like this. And something funny is that after I screen recorded the film and put it into iMovie to make that little exposition montage you just saw, I could actually understand what was being said better. Like, in what world would putting a film into iMovie make it easier to watch? Apparently this one. So if you're thinking of watching Tenet, put it into iMovie. You might just be able to hear the dialogue. My second watch was better, mostly because I knew the general story, and once again I could pick up on more stuff I missed the first time around. But my third watch was probably the best. At this point I knew what was happening in each scene very well, so while the audio was still god-awful, I stopped caring about hearing what they were saying and would just go with it until the next action scene. Which brings me to my next point. I think Tenet gets better with rewatches for those aforementioned reasons. You're more comfortable with the concept and exposition, and you don't have to strain as much to hear. But while I think watching Tenet more than once gives you the best experience, I don't know how much I like that. I am all for rewatching movies. In fact, the number of movies I rewatch probably outnumbers my new movies. But every movie I watch more than once is because I genuinely want to. I enjoyed those movies enough to want to experience them again. And while I did have that feeling to an extent with Tenet, the greater reason for rewatching it was because I felt I needed to. And that's a no-no. Even with other Nolan films, as difficult as they might be to understand and get through in the moment, I was still able to come out the other side satisfied and wanting to rewatch them at some point in the future for the fun of it. Tenet didn't do that. I came out of Tenet having enjoyed myself, but also having had the most annoying time. Rewatching it popped into my head immediately for two reasons. The action, because it really is something, and because I wanted to try and understand it better now that I'd suffered through the exposition and poor sound mixing once. We as an audience should want to watch something twice. Tenet doesn't so much as make us want to watch it twice, as it does force us to watch it twice. And I don't know, something about that just really doesn't do it for me. Most stories have some sort of emotional core to them. It makes for compelling fiction, as it develops characters and gives them more believable motivations, as well as appeals to the audience and gives them something strong to hold onto within the overarching story. And Nolan knows this. Some of his other films I've seen have been enthused with emotion. Inception had Leo DiCaprio's wife and Cillian Murphy's dad. Interstellar had Matthew McConaughey's children. And Tenet had... yeah, that's a problem. I feel like there was nothing deeper or emotional connecting the characters to the story, so there was nothing deeper or emotional connecting us to the story. The protagonist is only really interested in all of this inverted weaponry because... reasons? Like, he saw it in the field and then was ordered to go learn more, and he just did, and I guess it's believable in the sense that he's an employee who's doing a job, but that's not the most compelling of a story. We don't come to see an employee carrying out a task and only that. I mean, I don't know about you, but I want more from my stories. I want bigger personal reasons for characters to be doing the things they do. I want bigger personal stakes of what might happen if they don't succeed. By all means, there can be huge world-ending stakes to the story, but it means less to me if the stakes don't also affect the characters in some emotional way. I think Tenet tried to add in that emotional aspect with Kat's son, but we know and see so little of him that it doesn't work. He's not at the forefront of the story. I'm pretty sure he has like 2 lines, and that's not enough to connect Kat and us to him. The protagonist also has no emotional stakes. He's not infected by inverted weapons in a deeper way, and no one he knows is really going to be affected other than the people he met through his search, which again, is not the strongest. Neil and Kat are already in this deep on their own accords for the most part. Speaking of Neil, he isn't affected either. We know so little of him and his backstory, he couldn't be connected to the whole thing in a deeper way even if he tried. The only slightly emotional aspect of the whole story is the relationship between our leading 3, particularly for me, the protagonist and Neil. They seem to genuinely like each other, their friendship growing throughout the story as they get further into this inverted mess. And I guess it makes sense, seeing as Neil has known and been friends with the protagonist for a very long time. And I will say, the ending did hurt a bit. Knowing Neil was heading off to his death and that the protagonist couldn't do anything about it, and even if he could, wouldn't do anything about it because everything had to happen in the same way for them to be able to save the world, it was all quite sad. But even still, I feel like it wasn't enough. Two bros, or gay little time travelers, take your pick, is nice and all, but the relationship wasn't fleshed out enough to carry the whole emotional core of the story, which leaves the film feeling just a little bit hollow. It's almost worse because there are these clear attempts at including emotion, like Kat's son and the protagonist and Neil's friendship, but none of it is strong enough to fulfill that emotional need. It's like an itch that needs to be scratched, but never is. So, Tenet is a lot of things. It's intelligent, annoying, visually impressive, hollow, inventive, and convoluted. Having said all that, there is still something about Tenet that keeps me thinking about it, no matter how flawed it is. Maybe it's the interesting concept, maybe it's the stunning action, maybe it's the fact that John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, and Elizabeth Debicki are the holy trinity of beauty. I don't know. But for some reason, I cannot seem to get Tenet out of my head. And for better or worse, that is something special.